In around 1400 BC, when the Israelites settled in the Promised Land, their commander Joshua called a meeting of the leaders of all the tribes of Israel. Joshua was now very old, near the end of his life, and he made a speech that is referred to as his farewell address. He reminded the leaders of all the Lord had done for them, and told them never to turn away from the Lord to worship the idols of their ancestors and the idols of the heathen nations around them.
Fear the Lord and serve him sincerely and faithfully. Put away the idols which your ancestors served and serve the Lord.
He warned them that if they worshipped these idols, terrible things would happen. The leaders wholeheartedly declared that they would never turn away from the Lord their God. I'm sure at the time they meant it, but it didn't stick. Throughout the centuries, time after time, the Israelites turned away from the Lord their God and worshipped the idols of the surrounding heathen nations. They had a God who could part an ocean, dry up a river, and knock down the stone walls of a fortified city. And yet, somehow, the pagan nations had better gods. What made these gods of stone and wood so appealing? Did they watch the ceremonies of the heathen nations and think, that looks like fun? Fortunately, the Lord is a very patient God, though he sometimes used enemy nations to punish his rebellious children. In around 1200 BC, after 40 years of good behavior, the Israelites returned to idolatry, most notably Baal, a god of fertility, the weather, and war, and Asherah, a fertility goddess. So the Lord punished them with a longtime enemy called the Midianites, who were the descendants of Midian, Abraham's son by his second wife Keturah. They were a desert nomad tribe who despised the nation of Israel. And they must have been really excited to be used by God to be the villains in this story. At least, at the beginning.
Then the people of Israel began once again to worship other gods. And once again, the Lord let their enemies harass them. This time it was by the people of Midian, for 7 years. The Midianites were so cruel that the Israelites took to the mountains, living in caves and dens.
When they planted their seed, marauders from Midian, Amalek, and other neighboring nations came and destroyed their crops and plundered the countryside. They left nothing to eat, taking sheep, oxen, and donkeys. These enemy hordes arrived on droves of camels too numerous to count, and stayed until the land was completely stripped and devastated.
So Israel was reduced to poverty because of the Midianites. Then at last the people of Israel began to cry out to the Lord for help. However, the Lord's reply through the prophet he sent to them was this: The Lord God of Israel brought you out of slavery in Egypt, and rescued you from the Egyptians and from all who were cruel to you, and drove out your enemies before you, and gave you their land. He told you he is the Lord your God, and you must not worship the gods of the Amorites who live around you on every side, but you have not listened to him.
The Israelites were most likely expecting the Lord to bring them an instant solution to their problems, not a gloomy lecture from a killjoy prophet. The man is not named in the Bible, but his message was clear. The Israelites had brought this all upon themselves, but the Lord, in his mercy, would rescue Israel again, and, as he often did, used an unlikely hero to do so.
But one day an angel of the Lord came and sat beneath the oak tree at Ophrah, on the farm of a man named Joash. Joash's son Gideon had been threshing wheat by hand in the bottom of a grape press, a pit where grapes were pressed to make wine.
Ophrah was a city that was part of the Israelite tribe of Manasseh, and threshing wheat was normally done in a large open area, not a pit where grapes were crushed. But because of the Midianites, Gideon had to keep a low profile. His life had been reduced to just trying to survive. The angel of the Lord said to Gideon, "Mighty soldier, the Lord is with you." The angel's first words in different translations reads, "Mighty man of valor, strong warrior, valiant warrior, and most valiant of men." Gideon must have thought to himself, "Mighty soldier? This fellow has me mixed up with somebody else." "Stranger," Gideon replied, "if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? And where are all the miracles that our ancestors have told us about, such as when God brought them out of Egypt?" It had been roughly 200 years since the last miracle, when God stopped the sun for Joshua at Gibeon. It was like Gideon was saying, "What has God done for us lately?" Then the Lord turned to him and said, "I will make you strong. Go and save Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you." We don't know what the angel looked like. Sometimes he speaks as an angel, sometimes as the Lord himself. It was similar to Abraham's encounter with the 3 visitors on the plains of Mamre, roughly 800 years before. In Gideon's mind, he was nowhere near qualified to save Israel. A man hiding in a pit is nobody's first choice to be the commander of an army. And how would the people react to this claim? What was his father going to say when he told him that the Lord had called his timid and anonymous son to save the nation?
But Gideon replied, "Sir, how can I save Israel? My family is the poorest of the whole tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least thought of the entire family." Whereupon the Lord said to him, "But I, Jehovah, will be with you, and you shall destroy the Midianite hordes." Gideon replied, "If it is really true that you are going to help me like that, then do some miracle to prove it."
Imagine this from Gideon's perspective. A man stops by claiming to be God and that he will help Gideon save the nation. Why not ask for a miracle? It wouldn't be the last time he would put God to the test. Gideon continued, "Prove to me that it is really Jehovah who is speaking to me. But wait here while I go and get a present for you." "All right," the angel said. "I will wait until you return." Abraham and Sarah had prepared a meal for their 3 heavenly visitors, and now Gideon would prepare a meal of his own.
Gideon hurried home and roasted a young goat and baked some unleavened bread. Then, carrying the meat in a basket and broth in a pot, he took it out to the angel, who was beneath the oak tree, and presented it to him. The angel said to him, "Place the meat and the bread upon that rock over there, and pour the broth over it."
When Gideon had followed these instructions, the angel touched the meat and the bread with his staff, and fire flamed up from the rock and consumed them. Then suddenly the angel was gone. When Gideon realized it was an angel of the Lord, he cried out, "Alas, O Lord! I have indeed seen the angel of the Lord face to face." "It's all right," the Lord replied. "Don't be afraid. You shall not die." Gideon may have heard about God's warning to Moses that no one can see God and live. Gideon built an altar there and named it the Altar of Peace with Jehovah. Now that Gideon was on board with his mission, the first order of business was to get rid of the idols. After all, this is what got the people in trouble in the first place.
That night the Lord told Gideon to hitch his father's best ox to the family altar of Baal and pull it down, and to cut down the wooden idol of the goddess Asherah that stood nearby. Replace it with an altar for the Lord your God, built here on this hill, laying the stones carefully. Then sacrifice the ox as a burnt offering to the Lord, using the wooden idol as wood for the fire on the altar.
Gideon must have realized early on that this mission was going to take him out of his comfort zone. His first assignment was to tear down a pair of idols that his own father and the city elders had erected, and, for good measure, to kill his father's best ox.
So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord commanded. But he did it at night, for fear of the other members of his father's household, and for fear of the men of the city, for he knew what would happen if they found out who did it.
Early the next morning, as the city began to stir, someone discovered that the altar of Baal was knocked apart. The idol beside it was gone, and a new altar had been built instead, with the remains of a sacrifice on it. "Who did this?" everyone demanded. The Bible doesn't tell us how the blame got traced back to Gideon, but it did. They confronted Joash with nothing less than murder on their minds. "Bring out your son," they shouted to Joash. "He must die for insulting the altar of Baal and for tearing down the Asherah idol." Joash boldly defended his son, though the Bible doesn't tell us whether he had suddenly turned from these idols or not.
Joash retorted to the whole mob, "Does Baal need your help? What an insult to a god! You are the ones who should die for insulting Baal. If Baal is really a god, let him take care of himself and destroy the one who broke apart his altar."
Gideon earned a new nickname, Jerubbaal, which meant, "Let Baal take care of himself."